Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we cut through the noise and zero in on the insights you need. Today we're plunging into a topic that has really sparked intense public debate. How do communities confront far-right movements? You've probably seen the headlines, heard the arguments. I mean, everything from the viral video of Richard Spencer being punched to the shocking assault on Andy Nango and just heartbreakingly, the murder of Heather Heyer in Charlottesville. These incidents, they didn't just grab attention, they really ignited a fiery discussion about what people see as the options for action, even prompting, political responses.
It's pretty striking, isn't it? How often that public talk seems to narrow down to just a few methods, often pretty controversial ones. So our deep dive today, we're aiming to broaden that perspective way out. We're exploring a comprehensive guide called 40 Ways to Fight Fascists. And this isn't just like some theoretical paper. It was originally published back in 2018, then revised in 2020 by Spencer Sunshine. He's a PhD with over 15 years researching the U.S. far right. And importantly, it had input from PopMob, that Portland-based group. It unpacks 40 legal, practical, grassroots actions, things communities can actually do to counter the far right.
Okay, so before we jump into the how, let's clarify who this guide is talking about. He uses far-right as a really broad umbrella term, right? It's not just the openly bigoted white nationalists, but also groups like the Patriot Movement, Oath Keepers, Three Percenters. And then you've got alt-right groups like the Proud Boys, American Guard, Patriot Prayer, and even the guide includes patriarchal men's rights activists. That's a surprisingly wide net.
Precisely. And while their specific ideologies might differ, and they do, the guide makes this really crucial point about what they share. It's this foundation. They see human inequality as natural, maybe even desirable, and they consistently rely on demonizing others based on race, ethnicity, gender, religion, political views, you name it. This shared worldview, that's why the guide lumps these, pretty diverse groups together when talking about counter-organizing. It's less about their specific flag, maybe, and more about that underlying philosophy of exclusion.
Got it. So the core mission of this guide, then, is to contain their organizing, prevent the damage they inflict, and fundamentally, just raise the cost of being involved in far-right politics. It lays out a whole menu of tactics, really, but it also comes with a pretty stark warning. It says the far-right is aggressive, they don't shy away from using violence. And that underscores the guide's point that you absolutely need to safeguard yourself, safeguard your community, while using all the options available. So for you, listening in, this deep dive is kind of a shortcut to understanding these practical, community-based approaches. Approaches the guide argues are mostly legal and accessible. It offers a very different perspective from maybe the more sensationalized headlines we often see. So if you're thinking about countering these movements, where does the guide see you even begin? It sounds like it starts with some crucial groundwork, the Get Started section. The very first recommendation is to truly understand your opponent. And this isn't just knowing their group names, right? It's digging into their internal divisions, recognizing how they use code words or dog whistles to express bigoted ideas without, saying the quiet part out loud.
Yeah, it's about deciphering their language, but also their strategic vulnerabilities. Where are they weak? And the guide is really unequivocal here. This is absolutely not solo work. You need to find collaborators, forming affinity groups, organizations, coalitions. This kind of activism, it just demands coordination, specialization too, because there's more than enough work to go around for everyone.
Okay, so you've got your team, you're learning about the groups. Then the guide stresses really detailed monitoring of local far-right activity. This means documenting their organizations, their projects, social media, meetings, events, everything. What's particularly intriguing, I thought, was the suggestion of creating sock puppets, these fake social media accounts for infiltration, basically, to get into closed groups. But the guide also flags the need for technical sophistication here. You need to maintain anonymity, avoid detection. It turns into this kind of sophisticated digital chess game, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Operational security is key.
Absolutely. And then shifting from that groundwork to immediate impact, the guide pivots to take action. Detailing these direct community interventions, one key tactic is what it calls information warfare. So once you've gathered your research, you release it, either through activist blogs, reports, or maybe sharing it directly with local journalists for, wider impact. The guide notes that outing fascists, it still has a direct impact on their lives, sometimes public shame, sometimes even job loss. It just makes being involved less appealing.
And a very visible sort of on-the-ground tactic is reclaiming public spaces. This means immediately taking down far-right propaganda flyers, stickers, whatever, and ideally replacing it with your own messaging. It's not just cleaning up, is it? It's framed as a critical act of, like, visual dominance, asserting community values. It subtly but powerfully deters potential recruits and maybe bolsters the resolve of groups being targeted.
Yeah, exactly. And beyond the streets, there's this focus on pressuring institutions. The guide suggests pushing public groups, organizations, unions, whatever, to explicitly oppose fascism. There's a powerful example in there about the Sioux Falls AFL-CIO union. They actually amended their constitution back in 2018 to exclude fascists and white supremacists. That just shows how a clear institutional stance can really normalize anti-fascist positions within the mainstream.
Okay, another powerful tactic sounds like disrupting operations, making it genuinely difficult for far-right groups to even meet. So this means pressuring private venues, concert halls, restaurants to refuse rentals. And the guide reminds us the First Amendment protects private citizens calling for boycotts. That's an important point. There's a pretty compelling example from New York City where 2 venues actually closed permanently after hosting fascist concerts.
Right, and that makes it much easier afterwards to convince other venue owners that, hey, associating with these groups is probably not in your financial interest.
Yeah, that's practical pressure. What about refuting disinformation? How does the guide suggest handling that?
It's actually a bit counterintuitive. Instead of publicly debating their lies, which the guide warns can accidentally legitimize falsehoods, it recommends circulating lists of common far-right talking points with prepared rebuttals. So this equips community members with tools for, like, private arguments. You can counter the misinformation more effectively when someone's maybe on the fence without giving the far right a big public platform.
Smart. And in our digital age, online deplatforming feels critical. This means pressuring financial platforms, social media platforms to, well, deplatform far-right figures. The guide highlights the case of Milo Yiannopoulos. After he got banned from multiple platforms, he admitted he was millions in debt, couldn't make money from talk.
Exactly, and that tactic really highlights a modern vulnerability for these movements. They rely so heavily on digital platforms for funding and reach. Cutting off those lifelines, it just starves their ability to organize and amplify their message.
Okay, so moving into maybe more formal avenues, the guide discusses using the court system.
Yeah, lawsuits. They can impose a really significant financial drain on these groups. Part of the reason is they often lack sympathetic lawyers willing to take their cases, or they have to pay exorbitant rates. The Southern Poverty Law Center's successful lawsuits get cited, obviously, like that massive $14 million judgment against Andrew Anglin, the neo-Nazi propagandist. And the ongoing Sines v. Kessler lawsuit against the Charlottesville organizers is another key example. That case has already led to Jeff Shoup resigning from the National Socialist Movement and serious financial difficulties for Richard Spencer. So beyond just the financial penalties, these lawsuits create legal precedents, and they expose the often quite fragile organizational structures of these groups. It shows how legal pressure can really dismantle their operations from the inside.
Wow. Okay, then there's the tactic of exposing individuals. That sounds, well, certainly direct. The guide suggests revealing far-right activists at their homes, their workplaces. That could include calling employers, notifying neighbors with flyers, even organizing home demonstrations. Does the guide talk about the sort of strategic thinking behind that? What makes it effective? Are there potential downsides or things people need to consider?
It definitely emphasizes that the goal is to make participation in the far right unpalatable on a really personal level.
Yeah.
The guide points to that example of Richard Spencer's collaborator, Jeff Dietz. He was outed in Brooklyn, lost his office space, even got kicked out of his band. So the effectiveness often lies in those social and professional consequences. It just raises the personal cost of holding and promoting that ideology. The guide does underscore the need for thorough documentation and verifying information. Accuracy is obviously paramount in those situations. You don't want to target the wrong person.
Right, absolutely. So, okay, we've covered essential groundwork and some pretty direct actions. Let's explore how the guide suggests communities can proactively build resilience, how to counter these movements even before a direct confrontation happens. The section on Be Proactive starts with messaging first. What does that entail?
It's about getting your community's anti-bigotry message out there first and making it visible. Things like flyers, stickers, window signs, those online profile frames you see sometimes, catchy hashtags like #everydayAntifascist, memes. The core idea is to discourage recruitment by making your community's inclusive stance really visible and dominant, setting the tone.
And this proactive approach emphasizes community building too, right? With education and memorials.
Exactly. This means organizing things like public talks, reading groups, classes about fascism, its history, how it manifests today. It also involves holding memorial events, remembering historical fascist, racist, bigoted violence, lynchings, church bombings, things like that. The point is to connect those past events to the present, to underline the fact that this threat isn't new and it's ongoing.
There's a fascinating approach the guide suggests. Engaging the public by making a spectacle. I like that phrase.
Yeah, it's about creativity, recruiting artists, musicians, dancers to make political actions more vibrant, more entertaining. The idea is basically to be more captivating and approachable than the other side. Draw in curious onlookers, make the anti-fascist message more accessible, more appealing, maybe even fun.
Beyond the spectacle, though, there's a strong emphasis on preparedness and training.
Very much so. Organizing trainings, resource fairs, topics like first aid, self-defense, personal security, digital security, bystander intervention skills. It also involves forming emergency response teams, people with specific skills, like medic training or self-defense, ready for unexpected events. It's about ensuring a community is actually ready for whatever might come.
And all of this, it takes resources, doesn't it? People, money. The guide stresses resource mobilization.
Absolutely. Proactively recruiting skilled people, graphic designers, therapists, lawyers, people who can offer specific help. And fundraising before the funds are desperately needed. Build that war chest early. There's that really compelling example from Pop Mob in Portland. They leveraged a Proud Boys march back in August 2019, turned it into a pledge drive, raised over $36,000 for Causa Oregon, an immigrant rights organization. That's a brilliant example of turning a potential negative into a real positive for the community.
That really is. Okay, so when it comes to actually organizing in public spaces, counter-demonstrate, the guide first talks about winning public opinion. How do you do that?
Well, it's about using social media, using press outlets to sway public sentiment, using accessible and engaging content memes, again, comics, short articles, things people will actually share and digest. It's fundamentally about controlling the narrative, making the counter message resonate widely, and making the far right seem, well, unappealing and marginal.
And then you pressure officials, pushing local authorities to deny or revoke permits for far-right rallies.
Exactly. The guide gives the example of Berkeley, right after Charlottesville. Authorities there denied a permit for a far-right rally, but only after significant community pressure was applied. It really highlights the power of collective civic action. Sometimes officials need that push.
Okay, and then of course there are direct counter-demonstrations. What's the advice there?
The guide advises organizing these within sight and sound distance of the far-right events, if possible and safe. But this requires serious logistical planning. You need permits, transportation, legal observers, bail funds potentially, and crucially, taking precautions against doxing. That's the public exposure of private info to harass people. Security culture is vital.
And beyond the direct counter-protest, the guide outlines applying business pressure and documentation. How does that work?
It involves pressuring local businesses, hotels, restaurants, rental spaces to refuse service to far-right attendees coming in for a rally. Circulating pictures, warning local establishments, making their stay uncomfortable and unwelcome, and simultaneously documenting their rallies. High-quality video, photography. It's critical for identifying individuals, documenting any criminal acts, though the guide does note getting clear images can be quite difficult in chaotic situations.
Now, under safety and internal cohesion, the guide mentions something potentially controversial. Firearms at demonstrations.
Yes, it touches on the tactic of coming to demonstrations with firearms, if it's legal in that jurisdiction and consistent with the group's beliefs and principles. But it stresses heavily this should only be done as part of a group decision with strict adherence to the law, requiring prior training, and really clear communication with other organizers. It's not a casual thing. And crucially, it highlights the importance of avoiding airing internal conflicts among anti-fascist groups publicly. Why is that internal cohesion considered so vital from the guide's perspective?
That's a great question. I mean, it seems like such divisions could be easily exploited by the other side, couldn't they?
Exactly what the guide says. The far right actively looks for and seeks to exploit those divisions. Public disputes, they can fracture solidarity, undermine public trust, distract everyone from the primary goal. It essentially gives the opposition free intelligence and opportunities to sow more discord. So maintaining that united front, even when there are internal disagreements, is presented as a fundamental strategic imperative. Keep it internal.
Right. Okay, let's look at the final sections. Sustaining support and envisioning the future. The guide covers be supportive. What does that look like in practice?
It means providing really direct support to people who are being threatened by fascists. This could be real-world actions like escorting them places, running errands for them, even guarding their homes if it comes to that. Or it could be digital support, helping them wipe their online presence to make them harder to find, adding security tools to their accounts. Practical help.
And it also includes establishing safe havens and victim aid. That sounds incredibly important.
It's crucial. It could be as simple as having a safe house available for emergencies. Or, more profoundly, aiding families of victims. The guide gives this shocking statistic. Between 2008 and 2019, the U.S. far-right committed over 360 murders. That impacts thousands of family members, friends, community members. Support also extends to aiding individuals who are injured, help with money, legal issues, emotional support. It mentions organizations like PUAH, which tracks hate crimes without involving law enforcement.
And the support network extends to the legal system, too, with legal and prisoner support.
Yes, supporting those targeted by the law, maybe facing grand jury subpoenas or actual legal charges, and also supporting activists who end up imprisoned, providing financial help for things like commissary, phone calls, getting reading materials in, and just maintaining contact through letters and visits. Keeping those connections alive is vital for morale.
An often overlooked tactic mentioned is publicizing threats. How does that help?
The guide highlights that warning people privately is important, but also publicizing threats and attacks can help neutralize them. It exposes the reality of far-right violence, which can generate sympathy for those targeted. And crucially, it can drive wedges between the core far-right groups and those who might otherwise be sort of sympathetic or on the fence. It reveals the true nature of these groups when their violence is laid bare.
Makes sense. Next, the guide discusses countering recruitment and long-term vision. A key strategy here is fighting entryism. What's entryism?
Entryism is when the far right tries to infiltrate existing, often non-political social groups. Think like soccer clubs, online gaming communities, music subcultures, even religious communities like heathens or certain Orthodox Christian groups, sometimes even progressive groups. So fighting entryism is about supporting these communities and recognizing and pushing back against this insidious recruitment. The guide cites the example of Operation Werewolf, a white nationalist, anti-feminist group that disguised itself as, like, a workout club or esoteric men's group.
Wow. Okay, and then there's the more maybe nuanced approach of helping formers.
Right. This involves promoting and supporting exit programs. Organizations often run by former members of far-right groups like Life After Hate or the Free Radicals Project. The idea is to provide actual pathways, resources, and support for current members who want to leave the movement. It recognizes that de-radicalization is possible for some individuals.
And finally, the guide offers this deeper vision for the work, doesn't it? Show your larger political vision.
Yes, the bonus round, as the guide calls it. This connects the fight against fascism to a much broader struggle against all forms of oppression. So it's not just about being anti-fascist, it's about being part of a larger fight for equality and freedom for everyone. That includes addressing structural racism, attacks on immigrants, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, homophobia, transphobia, misogyny, all of it. It frames these specific actions against the far right within a comprehensive, positive vision for a more just and equitable society.
So after this really comprehensive deep dive, what does all this mean for us, for you listening?
Well, we've delved into this guide, 40 Ways to Fight Fascists, and explored this incredibly broad range of legal, practical, community-based tactics. The guide argues pretty convincingly that these methods can effectively raise the cost of participating in far-right politics and, importantly, mitigate the harm they inflict. It showcases just a diverse spectrum of actionable strategies.
Yeah, it really reframes what fighting can look like, doesn't it? Emphasizing community resilience, proactive engagement, not just reaction.
Absolutely. Much more than just the headline-grabbing confrontations.
So here's a final thought for you to mull over as we wrap up. If, as this guide suggests, the vast majority of countering the far right is perfectly legal and community-based, what assumptions might we be holding? Assumptions that prevent us from seeing the full spectrum of available actions when we face other complex societal challenges. We really hope this deep dive has maybe shifted your understanding a bit about countering extreme movements, and perhaps inspired some further thought on community resilience and the real power of collective, often quiet